Should we talk to Andrew Lawton now, who's actually at Davos? Because whatever we may feel or think about Davos, we simply haven't got the snow under our feet. We are simply unable, unlike Andrew, to feel the genuine atmosphere of Davos. Andrew, what's it like there? Are you having a nice time?
Yeah, it's great. You walk through and everyone's giving you hot chocolate. Today I was given Saudi Arabian hot chocolate. I was given Facebook hot chocolate. I was given United Arab Emirates hot chocolate. There's lots of hospitality, although a little bit of a cold weather for those of us that are not necessarily used to it. I'm Canadian, so I'm good, but some of the others I worry for.
You can't just douse yourself in hot chocolate in an attempt to inoculate yourself against circumstances. Andrew, have you seen anything so far? Like, firstly, I just want to get an idea of what it's like. Is it just like any ordinary conference, or can you see any evidence of globalist skullduggery aside from what sounds like delicious hot chocolate?
I haven't seen the globalist skullduggery just yet, but we're also still getting set up here. And it's a bit like a weird billionaire trade show, because when you walk down the main street, all of these stores, which the rest of the year are ski shops and coffee shops, have all been taken over by corporations that pay a large amount of money just to basically turn themselves into exhibits. You've got Microsoft and Salesforce and Uber and Amazon, and they all just try to bring in politicians and investors into these little pavilions, they call them.
Lovely metaphor for globalization. Little local stores taken over by big corporations.
That's amazing. They just turn them into little temporary little booths, lure you in like you're going to be shanghaied. So essentially, WF Davos, it's capitalist Coachella, it's globalist Glastonbury. It sounds like a lot of fun. Places where you would be buying a snowboard, you could be badgered about investing in Uber. That's what it's supposed to like. Have you been lured into any of them yet, Andrew? Or are you remaining discerning as a journalist?
Well, it can't both be true. I walked into them voluntarily because I want to get a sense of what the message is that they're giving. And interestingly enough, I went in earlier to the Mohammed bin Salman Foundation Pavilion. This is the foundation that is run by the Saudi royal family, although not officially, and was thrown out of it because my videographer dared to take a video of me walking through what they said was an open tour because they wanted to show off all the work they were doing to the public. And it strikes me as a bit odd that they would have the expense and effort of being here to show off what they're doing and then kick out a journalist for daring to want a video of it. And I find this to be very perplexing, although not all that surprising at the same time.
Andrew, I can explain that to you. You were about to engage in what is called malinformation. That's information that is true, but taken out of context. As long as they can control the context of the information, i.e. you're in a ski resort for globalists now, that's a fine context. But you start posting that on your social media and talking about what kind of, I'm going to use the word tomfoolery this time, the Saudi Arabian affiliates might have been engaged in. That could be malinformation.
It doesn't sound like Andrew's been granted the same kind of immunity that the Biden administration granted to bin Salman himself.
Do you see that? Gal's done it really, because bin Salman there, even though he's not a head of state, was granted immunity and the ability to travel into America, even after America said that they would make Saudi Arabia a pariah of the world, and presumably that was because of their involvement in the murder of old.
Well, they're alleged.
They're alleged? Hold on, we're still on YouTube. What the hell am I saying? Sorry, hold on.
Call it cracky.
This is the point. This is the World Economic Forum, is that all of the rules that exist everywhere else in the world for these countries don't apply. This is the place that right now is talking about Russia as being public enemy number one, but a couple of years ago had Vladimir Putin as a keynote speaker. It's a country that talks about the importance of free market and international cooperation, but rolled out the red carpet for Chairman Xi Jinping. They talk about press freedom on one side, but invite Saudi Arabia as being the special partner on the other. And they don't even seem to really care about that hypocrisy because they really are above criticism. And that term malinformation is, I think, a great way that they deflect against that criticism because you just don't understand it. You're a conspiracy theorist. You just don't get it. You're a bad actor. And this is all that happens to anyone who raises what I think are pretty legitimate criticisms about what happens here.
We're criticizing it, and I challenge anyone to call me a bad actor, especially if if they've seen the film Arthur, which I believe was very well acted indeed. Yes, by Mirren, but mainly by me. Mate, what kind of workshops they got going on there? We've got some of the events that could be attended. It reminds me a little bit as a comedian of the Edinburgh Festival. Can we see on screen some of those classes that are taking place? I know that Tony Blair is running a sesh over there. Look at that. There's Brian Stelter's doing the clear and present danger of this information with Brian Stelter. That's going to be a good one. Al Gore still going on about how difficult everything is. And look, Tony Blair, 100 days to outrace the next pandemic with Tony Blair. My God, he's got a head start. I hope that pandemic
it's all right, though, because it's him and Albert Bourla.
See, and you dared to mock that woman that asked the question about the next pandemic. They've got a session called The Next Pandemic.
That's outrageous, isn't it? Extraordinary. Which sessions are you keen to attend, Andrew?
Well, the one actually tonight that I'm interested in is about how we can all live a climate-positive lifestyle, because last time they all met in May, there was this executive with Alibaba bragging about how he was inventing this individual carbon footprint tracker that monitored what you ate and where you travel and how you travel and what you do. So I'm wondering if that might feed into the climate-positive lifestyle that they're going to be prescribing this evening.
Yes, it seems like the management of behaviour, the ability to observe transaction, and the sort of B.F. Skinner style capacity to nudge, or even, let's face it, control the way that we live our lives, where we spend our money, how we spend our money, seems to be centrifugal to the tenets of the WEF there. And when you bring that into conjunction with the advances around AI, and therefore, and that means another area where working people won't have any power or ability, i.e. to bond together in low-paid work in order to form unions and to oppose the agenda of the powerful. Seems like they're, in a sense, creating the perfect conditions for globalism, shutting down dissent, controlling information through these new terms that are becoming popularised, mis, mal, and disinformation. Are you having a look at any of the AI stuff while you're there, Andrew?
Yeah, AI is actually one of the big themes they're moving in towards this year. And I mean, obviously it's here. There's no avoiding it. It's a part of life now and will become more of one. But what's interesting is that on one hand, they're celebrating it and really making AI this central focus. But on the other hand, one of the sessions on the agenda is about how to deal with technology displacing 1 billion people, billion with a B, from their jobs because of technology. And this is not just replacing some pair of hands on an assembly line with a machine. We're talking about now with AI, replacing human minds. We're talking about replacing thinking individuals. And I think it's going to be a heck of a lot more than 1 billion people that are AI'd out of work. But the challenge is, it's not the people here at Davos that are ever going to find themselves out of work because of these innovations and because of these technological developments. No one here suffered during the pandemic. No one here is going to suffer from the need for reskilling or retraining because some computer has made their job redundant.
James Melville, our guest in the studio, similarly was diagnosing as the main problem or flaw in the Davos and the Davos mentality is that it exposes this bifurcation between the governed and the governing, that essentially the inadvertent metaphor of them being in rarefied air on the top of a mountain, issuing decrees that will not affect them, but will affect ordinary people whose lives they do not understand nor wish to understand, is central to this problem. And it seems to me that, in a way, the amendment to the conditions created by the ability of people to instantaneously communicate through new technology and therefore organise, the ability to oppose centralised establishment agenda through the communication of our own stories and narratives, in particular those that expose hypocrisy and corruption, is one, to create this new terminology, misinformation, disinformation and malinformation, and of course to replace working people in this AI era, to disempower people so that there's even less leverage for ordinary people when it comes to countenancing the evident agenda that the WEF Davos perfectly represents, even if you do get a wide array of sweet chocolatey beverages, Andrew, which seem to have swayed you and brought you over to the dark side. Got a question there, Gal?
Yeah, Andrew, I was just wondering if you might have any ideas around the kind of because obviously one of their big main topics is around disinformation this year. And as we've seen with the Davos before and the WEF, things that they've spoken about, for example, digital ID, that now we're seeing in California. Gavin Newsom is actually bringing in digital ID. So we are seeing the manifestation of things that are spoken about at Davos actually coming to become government policy. With disinformation and misinformation, we found a lot out through the Twitter files recently in ways in which there were these collusions between big tech and the government. So we are learning a bit more about that kind of influence. But what do you think the next big play might be to come out of Davos this year, and what we might see in the future manifest?
Well, a lot more people are paying attention to the World Economic Forum now than were 5 years ago. And I think a big part of this was when they came out with their Great Reset, which I know you're very well familiar with in 2020, as far as rebuilding the world after the pandemic. A lot of people who had never really had this organization on their radar started to look into it. And as you were talking about with James earlier, they start looking through the back catalog and seeing all of these other things that have been talked about before. And I think in the context of this year, the big challenge we're seeing is that there are conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum that have no basis in fact. When you hear people talking about, everyone being, for example, this pandemic was planned and orchestrated, people being injected with, 5G chips and stuff like that. But the problem is that they use those and elevate those conspiracy theories to deflect all of the other criticism that is very reasoned, that is very rooted in fact, that is very much defined and delivered in terms of their own language, their own prescriptions. And that's the challenge here. And to go back to the malinformation point, I think we're going to start to see more pushes to regulate this form of information, which means to censor this information. Last year at the annual meeting, there was a woman from Australia who has a government digital safety commission role who talked about the need to, in her words, recalibrate things that we've always understood. And she included in that specifically freedom of speech. So we need to recalibrate freedom of speech because it might not apply to the modern era. And I think that's going to be something we hear a lot more of. And if you look at what the UK is doing with the online harms bill, what Canada is doing with a number of internet regulations, these things are already coming. And I think when you get all these leaders that are of a shared mindset in one place, it will accelerate that.
It also shows that when people with shared interests come together, that there is an inevitability that a centralized agenda will emerge. Andrew, of course, you wrote the book Freedom Convoy. I wonder if you see in the WEF the topics discussed, and in particular what you have just said about that we are likely now to see a calibration of freedom of speech. A lot of you I know watching this, let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments, regard freedom of speech as an absolute right, an absolute value, obviously excluding immediately and evidently harmful declarations, the famous fire in a theatre example. I wonder, how do you feel like a globalist agenda played out during the trucker convoy? I'm just referring, of course, to the freezing of bank accounts of people that sought to fund that protest, the ongoing media malignment of the trucker or maligning of the truckers, and of course the fact that they were responding to a mandate decree that likely came from centralized and unelected bodies.
Well, I don't think anyone who watched what was happening in Canada in February of last year would be surprised to learn that there's a lot of criticism towards central bank digital currencies. Why would we ever accept a digital currency that the government controls when we've already seen a government in a so-called democratic nation freeze the bank accounts of its political critics? And as an added point, there was in Canada I believe it was in May, a system outage of the largest telecommunications provider. And for a day and a half, you could not send money to people. You could not use debit or credit cards in most retail outlets because they couldn't connect to the internet. And I think that was actually a very useful illustration of what happens when everyone's finances are controlled in a very centralized digital way. So I think that is very important here because we're talking about control, and you cannot have centralization without control that can be used either in a very malicious way by governments or even just by virtue of technological issues that can come down. So I think that this is something that people need to be more concerned about, and people need to pay more attention to, and not just be consumed by the so-called convenience of these innovations, that they don't realize the inevitable, I think, outcomes of this in someone who doesn't actually value fundamental freedoms.
That's brilliant, Andrew. Again and again, we hear how convenience and safety are used to advance the agenda of these authoritarian regimes that present themselves as anything but authoritarian. The promotion of digital IDs and centralized currencies ultimately lead to a greater ability to control. Even if you don't want to directly accuse existing administrations or corporate interests of having that agenda, certainly this new technology implemented in that way will afford that ability. Now, Andrew, you're at Davos. I want you to include, over the coming days, I'd like you to stay in touch with us through a variety of social media outlets. Yes, locals, where our Stay Free AF community is housed, but Twitter and elsewhere. I'd like to see selfies of you with various power players. You, Klaus Schwab, in an embrace. Do you think that you can stay in touch with us and get us some of those assets, please?
Absolutely. In fact, you mentioned Idris Elba earlier. All of the journalists covering Davos have tonight been invited to a reception just for journalists with Idris Elba. So I'll see if I can snag a selfie with him for you.
Yeah, because Idris Elba, of everyone there, is probably my favourite person there because of Luther. I like him in a lot of films and stuff.
Not Tony Blair, not Anthony Scaramucci.
No, actually, I do like Tony Blair as well. I think in particular I liked it when he said, Iraq definitely have got weapons of mass destruction. We're going to have to go to war with them. Then I think 1 million Iraqi folk died, and then he just sort of said sorry about that. And then he grew his hair too long in that lockdown when he looked like sort of Nosferatu, turned himself into a sort of a literal vampire man. Yeah, him, that guy, Tony Blair.
When I was here last time, Nick Clegg had a security detail. So wacky things happen in Davos.
Because who wants Nick Clegg, former leader of the Lib Dems in our little country, the UK, now, I believe, working by coincidence at Facebook Meta? It's weird, isn't it? He used to work in the government. Now he's got a job at Facebook Meta, almost as if there's a sort of a porous relationship between those two organisations.
He's just good at interviews.
He's just get that guy. I'll tell you who should run Meta. Him, that guy. But keep him safe. Make sure he's got a security detail at Davos. You don't want anyone sloshing hot chocolate up his abdomen. All right. Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. The first session's about to begin, which I'll tell you about in a second. Hopefully Andrew's going to scoot on over now to see Hilda Schwab and Idris Elba at the first WEF session. I think we're going to try and have a look at it. Do you know that Andrew wrote the book Freedom Convoy? You should follow him on social media, and you should do what I do and adore Andrew open-heartedly. Andrew, I hope we speak to you again soon. You're a lovely man.
Thank you.
See you, mate. Talk to you. Enjoy the rest of Davos. There he goes.
Oh, I loved him.
He was lovely, wasn't he?
Brilliant.